Next, we're going to move to Omid and his team. They're going to run a panel helping us figure out how we're going to monetize a bunch of the functionality that we just showed you and talk about some of the enterprise efforts. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my good friend, Omid Kordestani.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Brother.
I call him brother. Brother Jonathan. So hope this morning's session has been interesting to you. I noticed a lot of smiles in the audience when some of those cool spreadsheet features were demoed. I don't know what the smiles were about. You guys have new plans for your junior analysts and what savings they're going to have with all the technology we're going to put in their hands. So hopefully they can be even more productive for you. So where's my team? Come on, guys. Come on up. I'm going to introduce you afterwards. Let me just emphasize the strategy that we've talked about, as you heard from Jonathan, and you're going to hear throughout the day. This three-legged strategy is really a big focus for us on the way we've organized ourselves, really, to collaborate across these businesses and really focus on search, ads, and apps. And I'm going to really focus on the ads monetization, all these great new features and functionality that you see here, how we really plan to, on a global scale, take advantage of this as platforms and monetize them, and really also talk about our enterprise business and how some of the consumer applications of apps you see is going to translate to enterprises and small and medium-sized businesses. But first, what I thought the way I would organize this is really think about a lot of the questions I hear that come up during the analyst meetings we have, as well as the quarterly calls we have with you. So a lot of the themes and questions I have organized for this panel is trying to take some of the more insightful questions that you asked during these calls. So hopefully it'll be very productive with you. I would like to start by really discussing how we view what our next multi-billion-dollar opportunity to be. We hear that a lot. And I just have to say that the next billion-dollar opportunity is really our existing core business in search and network monetization. And from both a sales and engineering perspective, we're putting huge investments in all of these areas. We are taking our monetization platform, making it deeper and wider in many different directions. We think there's tremendous opportunities in better targeting, in different formats of targeting, and really applying this ROI-based innovations that we've done in search and extending it to all media. With me on the panel today are a number of key leaders, both on the product side and sales side and partnership side, that I will introduce you as their sessions come up. Nick Fox is sitting there all the way at the end there. He is really leading all of our advertising quality efforts, which is a delicate balance between quality and revenue. And we do a great job of both improving quality and revenue at the same time, and he leads that effort for us. David Fisher is in my organization. He leads the North America online organization, which is really a global platform we use to have the most efficient channel of serving our advertisers. And we'll talk a lot about how we serve both the smallest advertisers that spend dollars and tens of dollars with us to all the way advertisers that spend millions of dollars with us in a very efficient channel that operates on a global scale. Brian Axe, who is in product management, leads our network business for us in the product management group. And we're spending a lot of time to understand how better to monetize this network, especially as the dynamics of this network is changing, with social network traffic becoming a big component of it from our own properties as well as the network partners. Next, Tim Armstrong, who's my partner in the North America business. He leads our most sophisticated and largest region in the world in terms of revenue, the North America business. And a huge part of his organization continues to be focused on search monetization. And one of the biggest challenges we had this year was to really figure out how to organize ourselves, not only around the core business, but really try to incubate all these new areas that we're extending into, from display advertising, YouTube monetization, the trials we're doing in the TV space, all the way to print and radio. And we'll ask him a lot of questions about that space as well. Our customers are really demanding from us to be holistic with the way we approach their business and really solve their search needs that works really well for them. They understand it, but they continue wanting to invest in that and get better returns on it, as well as tapping into all these new incremental opportunities that we're exploring together. Last but not least, Dave Gerard, who's at my organization. He leads our enterprise effort as well as the Google Apps efforts for the enterprise, and has done a tremendous job building that business, and we'll explore the enterprise business with him as well as the penetration of the applications into this new space. The other point that I would like to raise for you, this is one of the questions that came up during the analyst call, was how do we take this as a disciplined approach? How do we decide between the different investments we're making in the sales force in the different countries? This year, we are using what internally we have coined this market investment model. It's really a challenge for us because we're operating truly at scale in every country in the world. And we've come up with this model in a very disciplined way, decide on incremental investments by looking at each country, whether it's a very mature market or an emerging market or a developing market, and really distinguish between them. What are our costs in operating in each of these regions, and where do we make these incremental investments based on the opportunities we see in the core search area, as well as all the other new areas we have. The product organization and Jonathan, we're starting to work very closely to do the same job with them from a product perspective. How do we launch in as many places as possible, but from a monetization perspective, kind of prioritize our investments in each of these markets on a country-by-country basis, and again, decide how we go from an emerging space all the way to a maturing market. And we can talk about that during the Q&A session with you. But let me start the discussions here with the panel by asking a couple of questions from them, and then we'll open it up to the rest of you. So first, I want to open it up with Nick. There's a lot of interest in how do we do this optimization and trade-offs between quality and revenue. And a lot of times to the people outside the company, it seems like it's a black box approach and a very complex approach. And I would like to have him share with the audience here what our philosophy is here and how we approach this trade-off.
Great.
Nick.
Thanks, Hamid. Good morning, everyone. I think you're right that ads quality does certainly is a complex area sort of under the hood, but I think the goal of ads quality is actually very simple. The goal of ads quality is to show the highest quality ads to our end users, or as Larry would put it, the goal of ads quality is to show a set of ad results that are as or more relevant than our search results. It's a tough goal, but it's sort of what we're working on, is where we're trying to get to. The reason that we care about ads quality, and the reason that it's a key focus for us, is because we believe that if we show the best ads to our end users, our users will look at ads, our users will then click on ads, our advertisers, as a result of that, will get leads, our partners will earn revenue, and Google will earn revenue as well. So it's a model that's worked very well for us, basically focusing on the end users first, and sort of all else follows in a nice virtuous cycle. There are a few levers that the ads quality team can play in actually ensuring that the ads are as high quality as possible. We start out by looking at ranking. Basically, we want to show the highest quality ads at the top of the page, and then the lower quality ads get shown lower down on the page. Some ads are such low quality, so bad that we don't want to show them at all. In that case, what we do is what's called disabling. So this is the second thing we can do. We essentially disable the low quality ads. Sometimes our ads are such high quality that we want to show them in more prominent locations or in additional contexts. What we do, we have a system called promotion, which enables an ad to get promoted from the top of the right-hand side of the page to show above search results, which is really reserved for the case where the ads are such high quality that we really think that giving them more prominent location will improve the user experience as well as our revenue. The fourth and fifth things we can do, the fourth thing is basically how we match ads to queries. It's not always obvious how a keyword should get matched to a query, or how a specific ad should get matched to a query. So we spend a lot of time figuring out what are those relevant matches and which ones are not relevant. And then the final thing we can do is change the UI of the ads, the look of the ads. One of the changes that we've talked about in the past was, for example, changing the color of the top ads, the background from blue to yellow. These are the types of changes we can make in UI. So that's sort of the set of things we can change. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about the approach as well. There are essentially three core elements to the approach. Number one is that we have a very algorithmic approach. Number two is that it's experimental. And then number three is that it's a lot of little things that actually add up to a lot. In terms of algorithmic, as Google, we do a great job with very impressive data centers, great machines, and great algorithms. So in ads quality, we've taken an approach of saying, let's look at all the ads in real time for every single query, for every ad for every single query, and throw that at the machines and basically build incredible machine learning algorithms to predict in real time which are the best ads to show. This has a number of advantages. Number one is that it enables us to really use user feedback. So the users are the ones that are telling us which are the good ads. It's not someone like me or someone else in a room sort of making judgments on this. But numbers 2 and 3, number 2 is that it's very scalable. We can actually do it in a way that's appropriate for every query. And number 3 is that we can, it doesn't sort of rely on human judgment. It's something we can do fairly for all ads. The second core element of the approach is it's very experimental. At any given point in time, we're running dozens and dozens of experiments that are different changes or tweaks or whatever it might be to the ad system. We don't rely on people like me or the engineers on the team to say, here's what's likely to work or here's what's not going to work. Instead, we rely on the data. We'll run the experiment. We'll see what works. If it doesn't work, we throw it out. If it works, we'll launch it. But we're seeing data even by the hour of what's working and what's not working, and we can make those changes really quickly as a result of that. The third element is that it's a lot of little things. I think analysts, you guys tend to focus on sort of the couple of things we mentioned because it's the things we actually talk about. So, for example, in the most recent quarter, we talked about a change to the top ad promotion formula. But the reality is that behind the scenes, I think Jonathan mentioned this on the analyst call, there were over 20 changes last quarter that we made to our ads quality. The reality is that it's actually the sum of all these little things that are adding up to the impressive results that you see, rather than the 1 or 2 things that we actually proactively talk about. I'll give you an example. We made a change at the beginning of July in German. It was called German decompounding. Basically, something I didn't know, and the German team told me this. In German, what would normally be multiple words in English, these words are often combined into a single word. I'll give you an example. Flower bouquet in English is actually Blumenstrasse in German. There's no space between those 2 words. That actually creates a problem for our ad system because we're trying to match, we want to be able to match flowers to that, we want to be able to match bouquets to that. So what we did was we launched a change in German that actually enables us to handle that much better. It was an incremental change, but it was one of these things that actually adds up to the impressive results that we see. Overall, there's no plan to sort of launch one big thing every quarter. Instead, it's once the experiments indicate that we should launch something, we launch it. It's a sort of incremental, very, 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 very data-driven approach that we take.
Thank you, Nick. We turn it over to David Fisher, who manages this online platform where we, as I mentioned earlier, is the most efficient way we can serve our advertisers on a global scale. And it represents a diversity of advertisers by geography as well as size. And love to hear from David. How do you see the opportunities there? How do you see the existing accounts as well as the opportunities for new acquisition?
Sure. As Omid mentioned, it's a huge challenge, but also a huge opportunity to serve such a diverse and broad range of advertisers, from the smallest mom and pop shops, local businesses, maybe your local dog walker or babysitter, all the way up to huge brand names that everyone here would recognize spending big sums with us. And in addition to that range, what's really rewarding for us to see is sometimes, thanks to AdWords, you see the people, e-commerce players who start out small, and through AdWords they're able actually to move on up, and in some cases even compete and spend at levels comparable to some of the big players. What we see, though, is a lot of growth primarily in the core search business. Omid is exactly right when he says, and we try to focus on this every day, that the next billion-dollar opportunity is our core search product. And one of the pieces of feedback that I hear a lot, and our team hears a lot from our advertisers, is saying, we love what you're doing for us, we love the ROI that AdWords generates for us, but we want a lot more traffic. How can you help us with that? Now, we probably can't ask for a better challenge than that, but that's an important thing that we have to work on with our advertisers. And there's a bunch of things that we do, both in the back end, working with our engineering teams and with our teams around the world to provide that for advertisers. Quite simply, on the most basic level, when advertisers are asking us for better performance and more traffic through the core search product, there's a number of optimization techniques we can do, working with their accounts, with their keyword lists, and so on. And what we see is that we can also help them, most importantly, with their ROI, because we really think about this as a win-win partnership. If we can drive their success, obviously that's very much in our interest. But also in terms of driving the number of places they show up, their distribution, and so on. And so we do that through our teams. There are also a bunch of optimization techniques that we've launched on the product side. Perhaps you've heard of some of these, but things like Budget Optimizer that in an automated way with minimal to no work on the advertiser's part best allocates their budget. There's a website optimizer that allows them to test different landing pages Conversion Optimizer, which I think Brian might talk about differently. So we're constantly innovating and testing on ways that we can better serve our advertisers and help them maximize their ROI. It's also important to, when we think about our core business, we think a lot about the AdSense network. And I think everyone probably knows we have a very large network out there, and it's growing. And there's a lot of benefits to that sort of scale, but we also want to provide our advertisers precision at scale. And what we're increasingly hearing is, how can you help us target really effectively? And probably one of the most utilized tools we have, and the growth on this has been fast in the last year and continues to grow, is site targeting, letting our advertisers actually choose where across the broad content network they want their ads to appear. And then on the other side of that, performance placement reports, which let them actually understand a very detailed level. So the idea is to take that scale but provide precision that let them pinpoint target. The final thing I should mention is that while we have a very large and diverse advertising base, we're also very cognizant of the fact that still in the big scheme of things, that it's still early times and there's still a lot of headroom there. And in terms of the number of advertisers we have, even in the U.S., when you look today, particularly at the local market, there's still only over half of all small businesses don't even have a website. So there's an opportunity. We're trying to help bring them online. And as we do that, some of those folks will come to advertise with us quickly, some down the line. And likewise, around the world, there's a lot of acquisition opportunity that we're focused on through a number of channels, and we're constantly testing there as well. So we see a lot of opportunity in our core business, but obviously lots of growth, and we still feel like it's early in the game.
Thank you, David. So Tim and I spend a lot of time with our biggest advertisers and media companies across the U.S. Tim, could you give the audience your perspective of what you're seeing from the CMOs, CEOs, in terms of their view on search, the opportunities there, as well as extensions of our business?
Sure. So I think from an industry level, there's actually, it's accelerating. I think the velocity of interest in online as a total subject matter is actually increasing, both on the advertiser and agency and on the media partner side. Overall, and I think within those buckets, I think there's a couple really key areas that we're focused on. I'll give you a quick example. I was at one of the largest CPG companies last week and meeting with them. And one of the things that we've kind of pioneered at Google is these things we call asset maps, where we basically, in a very mechanical way, help a company that may be a very large multi-billion-dollar company put all of their assets, all their products, services, and kind of advantages, on one kind of map. And when we sat down with this company, who is a great partner today, I'm sure will be even a better partner, in the future, we realized that they, in essence, only had brands in Google's system right now that represent kind of 1% of their overall revenue or company revenue. And I think from our standpoint and their standpoint, we looked at that relationship as a very positive relationship already. But when we looked at this asset map and said, wow, we're having a lot of success here in this 1%, is it likely we could spread this to the other 99%? I think the answer clearly was yes. I think that type of interest level, but also just very focused, deliberate work on our part with these companies to make sure two things happen. One is their products and services, whether it's advertisers or media companies, follow the digitally transitioning consumer. And number two is that we do it at scale. I think that most of the customers that we have today are very heavily involved with us in search, and we have a lot of room left to grow there. I think second of all, some of the things we've been doing in the brand ad space and the testing that we're doing in the offline areas are of high interest to these customers. I think they're still on a small scale, but the scale doesn't represent their interest in those areas. I think they have a high level of interest. So in general, if you were to look at the top 100 kind of partners for us in the advertising world, I think you would see all of them. If you check down if they were spending more or less, or their interest was more or less, I think you would see green dots next to all of them directionally. And then two, I think you'd see us investing very heavily in terms of very consultative teams that we're on the phone with these people every single day. One big difference in our program versus I think other people's program is our program is actually built entirely on consumer schedules, not on media schedules, which doesn't sound like a big thing, but when you build your company and our process and our products and relationships on a consumer schedule, it means you're basically real-time, 24/7 in contact with these customers based on how different consumer patterns are changing. And I think on the publisher side, we're doing a good job of that as well.
Okay, thank you. Brian, on the network side, I think the diversity of it is really representing the diversity of the web today, and especially as social networking is really taken off as a big component of that. How are you seeing the dynamics of the network and the monetization opportunities evolving on our network business?
Great. Yeah. Start with our history and the core growth itself has really been driven by the same tenet that search ads have been driven by, and that's useful ads. When we first launched AdSense for Content, it's been almost 4 years now, almost 5 years actually. The idea was pretty new to the web, that here we took these assets that we had created within search that were very finite and laser focused to an interest, and placed them on topic areas that were very laser focused and interesting. So, for example, mountain biking ads on a mountain biking page. That was just not possible before AdSense for Content had launched, and that's really what's fueled much of our growth. So that's kind of the theme for the drivers that we're seeing in the way that we look at the future growth of the content network. So ads quality being first, and many of the things that Nick had mentioned apply directly to content. The next one being the traffic acquisition from publishers and the features that we offer our publishers. And then the third one being the advertiser controls, different ways that advertisers can segment the inventory, like the large social network inventory that we receive. So on the first one, ads quality, very similar to all the processes that search ads go through that Nick had described. The one thing that's a little bit different is that our signals are not as pure. What's the intent of a user when they're reading a news article or on a sports page? And we work very well on the contextual signals if you're researching a camera, or if you're you're on an outdoor magazine, reading about mountain biking trails, as the example that I mentioned. Moving further into new types of signals, this is an investment area for us and an interesting direction relative to taking some of the brand dollars that have been more of the art side of it and turning it into a science. So let me jump into the second one, the traffic acquisition side. That there's more publishers that we can bring online, and a lot of this growth is actually coming from international growth. The existing publishers that we have, we see a lot of growth just from getting more share of site within the existing publishers that we have. And then lastly, new inventory types like social networking. And social networking, we have a very broad footprint and are investing in how better to monetize this inventory. It's very high usage and not high monetization relative to the contextual pages. One of the interesting things with this broad footprint, we go from the MySpaces to ethnic sites like Black Planet. We're in Facebook applications, helping application developers to monetize their applications, and then also the dating sites and fun sites like Hot or Not out there, and they all have very similar aspects to them. And the key investment area for us is how to segment that audience based on the various different signals to put the most targeted ad in front of the users based on their intent. One example of this, MySpace actually has as many male 55 and olders on MySpace as the New York Times does. But if you just buy MySpace across the board, that's not what you're going to get. So being able to segment the audience per the goals of the advertiser is a really key investment area for us, and we've seen some great wins in the early stages of this. The third one, just to drill down, as I mentioned, the segmenting audiences for advertiser control is one area, but there's also, this is where I get into the art and the science of it. So the science is the contextual signals and the signals that we know we have, we know what the user intent is about. The art side of it is, well, users, that mountain biking example, if I'm the mountain biking advertiser, I may want to be on more pages because I've bought all the mountain biking pages out there. Would it perform on sports pages? Or would it perform on sports pages only in big metropolis areas? These are the types of things that we'd like to enable through controls for advertisers to experiment with. It's sort of the art of, they have intuition, they then try it, and they turn it into a science by then looking at the feedback loops and the metrics behind it. So all three of these together really tie into a fourth one, which is the network effect, which helps to fuel our growth. And just to describe that in more detail, we've got the ads quality, which produces the better, highly relevant ad to the user, so we get more clicks. Those clicks represent higher monetization from the publishers. As the publishers monetize more, that creates the demand for the advertisers to come in. And as the advertisers come in, that then increases the monetization to the publishers, which then creates the cycle of getting more advertisers, et cetera, et cetera. So we're very bullish about the things that we've seen with the investments that we've made and the headroom that we have still to go in the space.
Thanks, Brian. When I was looking for a leader of the enterprise business, one of the challenges we face is as a consumer company, there's this stream of innovation like the ones you saw earlier in Jonathan's session, and finding a leader that can really translate those for our enterprise customers. And as you've seen this year, we've made significant investments in this space, including acquisition of Postini, and Dave Gerard really leads that business for us. So could you tell us more about how your business fits in this
Sure.
Google strategy that we've talked about?
Thanks, Omid. Yeah, the enterprise business at Google, I think, has amazing potential, and it has potentially a lot of impact out there, and I mean that in several dimensions. I mean, on the enterprise IT industry, I think we already are having an impact, and we are just getting started. I think certainly on Google as a company, we have the potential to be a really important part of this company over time. And probably as important as anything else, really, to the experience that people have every day with technology in the workplace. And I think that's how we think about this business. There's a couple of very big trends that are compelling and that I think make this a worthwhile business for Google. To start with, the way technology has worked and the way innovation happens has really changed. If you think back 20 or 25 years ago, you always had the best access to technology when you were at work. You had the best computers, you had the best software, the best phone systems, what have you. And when you returned home at night, you sort of went back in time, right? You had maybe 3 channels of network television, and that was about it. And in the past couple of decades, and really this is accelerating, that situation is really inverted. You, as a consumer, have access to amazing technology, and the pace of innovation on that technology is incredible. And when you go into the workplace, you tend to feel like you went back in time. And the technologies are not nearly as inspiring and as compelling. And you saw a lot of this in Jonathan's session earlier today in what we're doing on the consumer side. And that's the sort of breathtaking pace that happens. It's not just Google either. It's a lot of other web companies. It's companies like Apple with the iPod, and more recently the iPhone. It's what the guys are doing in the game consoles with Microsoft and Sony, and now Nintendo doing amazing things. The pace of innovation on the consumer side just flies forward. For some reason, and probably some very good reasons historically, there's really been this Chinese wall between technology for the consumer and technology for the workplace. And that might have made sense in the past. We think in a lot of ways it doesn't make sense for the future. So the core of our enterprise business is how can we channel this innovation that's happening at this incredible pace on the consumer side, very user-centric, very geared towards simplicity and usability, and channel that into the enterprise and make tools that make a business more productive and the users more happy with that technology. Now that's fairly unprecedented, so it's not, but there are a couple of interesting things, really pushing this. We started an enterprise in about 2002, before my time here, in a very modest way, and we aimed to solve a problem that made sense for us to start with, naturally, search, and solving the problem of information access and search within the context of a business. And that search appliance business has grown nicely, and it's really gotten us a solid footing with more than 10,000 customers out there. Earlier this year, we tapped into something which we believe has potentially more potential in terms of impact, and really the idea of delivering Google's hosted applications, our email application, our calendar, our spreadsheet application that you saw Rajan demonstrate earlier, and package those up in a way that would take advantage of all this innovation, but would also have all the things you need to deploy them inside a business. And that can be a small business, a very large business, a university, a nonprofit. And really by combining this innovation with the things businesses need, which are really security, manageability, low cost, policy enforcement, the things that IT organizations, CIOs, think about and live with every day, you could really have some breakthrough opportunity here. The other really compelling trend that's driving this is the whole software as a service thing that's happening in enterprise software. And that's really, I'd say Salesforce.com really started leading this initiative many years back. And we're really beginning to join this parade as well and hopefully contribute to it. But the idea that hosted software where you don't have to install anything, you don't have to manage anything, you get this train of innovation, you get it at a much lower cost, is a very compelling story. And when you put kind of this consumerization of IT together with this software as a service hosted applications, those two come together to be a very, very powerful opportunity. And that kind of encapsulates what we think is exciting and what we're trying to do in the enterprise part of Google.
Great. Thank you very much. Nick, there's a lot of discussions about the headroom in our monetization, as we optimize and do this in a very scientific, algorithmic way a lot of times. What are the opportunities that you see? There are verticals where the prices seem to have reached high levels and the auction is working really well, and there's this ongoing question of what do you see as the upside available in our approach to search?
I get the question that gets to with the stock price, right? So the reality is, I think the first time, I'm not sure if Omid remembers this, the first time Omid asked me this question was about 3.5 years ago, I think. And he continues to ask. So we've looked at this a lot, actually, and there's a variety of dimensions by which we look at this. I think all of these point to the fact that there is still substantial headroom within monetization. There's a few ways I look at this. Number one is, if you looked at some of the presentations earlier today, particularly the universal search one, you see great results. You see great examples where we're showing fantastic search results. What my eye goes directly to is the ads. And for example, on the Hillary Clinton query that Jack showed earlier today, the quality of the ads was actually quite low. It shows that there's actually, in terms of headroom, there's a lot of opportunity to improve the quality of those ads. We're not at the point where we're sort of reaching the goal of ads that are as good or better than search results. There's still a lot of headroom just to improve those algorithms, to improve the targeting, to improve the relevance of the ads that we're already showing. Number two is, as we've focused on ads quality a lot over the past couple of years, one of the things we've been saying is, as we've been showing higher quality ads, we've also been showing fewer ads. What that's created is a situation where there's actually quite a bit of unsold inventory. There's a whole bunch of queries that don't have any ads on them at all, or another set of queries that show ads or maybe show 1 or 2 ads. Jack actually had another great example of that. He had his Ninja query. There were no ads on that query. There are clearly ads that are relevant to Ninja, for example, Ninja weapons or Ninja costumes or whatever it might be ads.
What does our policy team say about that?
But the reality is we've gotten to a place where we actually have a lot of opportunity to look at these queries, for example, long tail queries or whatever it might be, and find additional opportunities to show ads on those queries. The third way I would look at this is by looking at the work that the ads quality team, my team, does. You might think that over time, as we do more of these ads quality changes, we're sort of plucking away the low-hanging fruit and then there's potentially nothing left. That's not actually the reality. The reality is that over the course of the past few years, we've been developing a team which has an incredible set of expertise in how to monetize search results pages, how to deliver the best user experience. And as we've built up that set of expertise, the set of things we can do now is far beyond any of the things we could have sort of dreamed of doing 2 or 3 years ago. What we see as a result of that is the pace of innovation is actually increasing within ads quality. As Jonathan mentioned on the call last week, we launched over 20 changes in Q3 of this year. If you compare that to Q3 of, say, 2003, there were probably 2 or 3 changes. That's a 10x increase in the number of changes, and those changes are still having impact on the same scale. So the ability to make changes and improve the quality of our ads has actually increased over time as we built this team of experts, statisticians, computer scientists, economists, et cetera, who can really understand how to, basically the science of monetization. The fourth thing I'd point out, and this probably goes more to some of what we do on the sales side, but it is the opportunity internationally. If you compare a market like the US or the UK, fairly mature markets, to countries like in Asia or in Latin America or in Europe, while we're still seeing strong growth in our more mature markets, there's even more growth that we're seeing internationally as we get new advertisers, as those advertisers learn how effective AdWords can be for them, and they devote additional budget to AdWords. So across all of these dimensions, I think we really do see that there's still substantial headroom here, and we're obviously very excited about it.
Thank you, Nick. So on those 2 dimensions, both international as well as the ways we're extending our business, we'll touch on that in the next 2 questions. I'll start with David to talk about how our global operations are capturing the international opportunity, how the investments we are making in our platform of serving these advertisers in the organization. How do you see these opportunities evolving?
Sure. We have an advertiser base that we literally have advertisers in just about every country in the world where you can access the internet. and in every language. And in the early days, when we first launched the AdWords pay-per-click model, and as we thought about our aggressive internationalization plans, we started with an assumption that we would need to really customize as we look to market for the local culture, the local advertising market, the local language, of course. And what we discovered pretty quickly, but was a key insight for us, is that it's actually this global platform that we have that allows the single AdWords platform for you to use that to target across the whole world. Actually, there's a lot more in common between all of these markets in terms of the advertiser experience, both what works for advertisers and, most importantly, to what we're going to focus on, what's not working for advertisers. And so what that fundamental insight allowed us to do is build a model that really is global in scale, but focused on a lot of centralization and efficiency as we thought about how we're going to service these advertisers around the world, and build a model that allows them ultimately to help themselves and to get as much services themselves with assists from us where possible. And so what we've aimed to do is build up large centers in each of the geographies where it makes sense for time zone and language reasons, but rather than necessarily being in each market the way that this direct sales team, the folks like Tim and his teams who are out there with a lot of face-to-face meetings, if you go to our European headquarters in Dublin, where we have a large team, and I really enjoy walking around the floor there because you walk around and you hear from one, every few footsteps you're hearing a new language, and I can't even identify what all those languages are. By last count, I heard there's something like 44 different languages spoken by the employees there serving the broad EMEA market. But if you actually stop and talk to them about the conversations they're having with advertisers, there's a lot more in common, and so there's a lot of best practice sharing, a lot of efficiency that we get by the global model that we have, not just within these centers, but sharing work within our locations, so around the world, that between the US, between Europe, between our Asian operations, particularly our India operations, which have gotten very large and which are providing a lot of efficiency for us as well. There's one other area that we invest in a lot as we think about how we want to scale our operations, and that is automation. Just being Google, a technology company, of course, it's not surprising that we think about engineering solutions. But just to give you one example, when we launched AdWords back 5.5 years ago, it used to be the case that every single ad that was submitted, we had a series of policies, and some of our syndication partners have particular policies that the ads have to meet, and every one of those ads was manually reviewed by a human. And as you can imagine, as we scale this ad system, that's something that would add a lot of cost and be challenging. Today, it's the case that over 80% of ads require no human review because they're all done in an automated way, and we're highly focused on getting that number higher and higher. Similarly, as we think about all our other key processes, trying to add automation and leverage the engineering talent we have within the company and make us really efficient so that we can ultimately provide a great operating model, but ultimately serve our advertisers, generate value for them in an efficient way for Google.
Thank you. So I would like to turn the discussion over about the new opportunities, especially in brand advertising. And before I ask Tim how he sees the opportunities and challenges with our biggest customers now, I would like to have Brian maybe give us a glimpse, our only demo, versus the last session on how some of these brand ad formats are working with us today and what we're seeing their opportunity.
Great. I have the great honor of demoing gadget ads, which many of our advertisers are very excited about. And Peter's going to help drive as I walk through it. One thing to say, too, is that this is essentially, what is a gadget ad? It's a rich media platform that Google offers, not just for brand advertisers, but also for direct response goals. Could be used in either case. In this case, you're seeing a typical website, YouTube, and the ad on the right here is the ad. It may look like a typical ad, but as you start to interact with it, you realize that it's not. Here you're seeing the live traffic updated for a local area that when you put in your zip code that you can see. And it's got the draggable and zoomable type of interface that you would see with our maps. And the way to think of this is almost a mini mashup that has advertising wrapped around it and advertising benefits embedded throughout. You can also go to the, again, tying the message to the functionality. Here's the Nissan Altima viewing from the inside. You can drag the interior around. You can zoom in. And if you zoom in and actually look really closely, you can see that the navigation system has that live traffic as well. So this ties back to the identity of the Nissan Altima having live traffic. You just saw this great functionality where you can see the live traffic within an ad without leaving the website and have this great engagement type of experience. So advertisers really like this, not just for the sexiness of the what you can do with this, with taking all the open standards and such that you heard about this morning and applying that to ads, but also because of the low-cost infrastructure. There's a great way that we architected this in that there's the flexibility that the advertisers have. They can use their open standards. They host this on their own website, and then we cache it within our system so we can leverage the low-scale cost infrastructure as well as the Google homepage type of performance and deliver this worldwide in a very low latency from a user standpoint, and then also through the hooks that the advertisers or agencies on behalf of advertisers can put in here, they can track over 60 different interaction types. So now brand, it's almost like brand response that you can start to have all sorts of responses that have some value to the brand engagement, in this case the association of live traffic with Anisa Ultima. One last thing to mention is the advertisers that are using this, we're seeing them have bigger budgets, start to point their budgets towards the buy across the content network because the Rich Media Platform is built in with the functionality that they get from a Gadget ad.
Thank you, Brian. So Tim, are we getting real engagement on these new formats? What are you seeing?
Hope so. So yeah, I mean, from a broad perspective, I actually just spent an hour and a half this morning with the team who's kind of in charge of this. The customers, and I think we are getting real traction, I think, for multiple reasons. I think, one is the essence of, and I think the people that we actually compete against in the marketplace, if you listen to their calls recently, their earnings call, have talked about how brand and search are moving kind of closer together from a metrics standpoint. So I think what Brian just mentioned about the brand response, the more measurement you can put on top of this type of functionality in the brand space, it's actually getting tremendous traction overall. And I think from a broader perspective, in a lot of the new initiative areas that we're doing, a lot of it is tied to basically a few different things. I think on the publisher side, it's tied to better yield management, so not just offering text ads, but these type of ads which potentially have as higher monetization. The second piece is on the advertiser side when describing that kind of asset map. Once we do that heavy work with the advertisers and we understand what all their assets are and then their goals under each asset, we can start to layer in not just search but start to layer in these type of products and services behind them. So at the end of the day, something we've been working towards is having a fully functional marketing dashboard, which is something that we've been building. I think it takes search, it takes brand ads. The new initiatives we're working on in the offline space are starting to get built into those. So as a customer, you can look across not only your assets, but your metrics and the engagement cycles. And I think brand ads happens to be the most adjacent business for us, and I think that adjacency is leading to some very interesting, progress and conversations. I think we've approached it like we approached search the first couple of years, as we tried to do it the right way. I think even YouTube, for instance, when we bought YouTube, we probably could have monetized it in the very traditional way brand ads are done online. We took roughly 9 or 10 months to try to figure out a really nice user engagement that also led to very good advertiser results. So I think we're making very good traction. I think other things like the DoubleClick deal and other things will continue to layer in more and more functionality and success in this specific space. And then I think we have very nice tests going on in the spaces outside of search and brand, which will hopefully continue to layer in more information here.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Last question for the panel. So on the Google Apps front, Dave, how are you seeing the traction within the enterprises, with ISPs perhaps, universities, as we saw in the video earlier?
Yeah, it's been great. Like I said, we're about 8 months or so into this product. We really launched it in full force just in February of this year. And like you'd expect for a hosted product, the uptake is enormously quick in small businesses. But we actually are seeing a lot of progress across businesses of all sizes. There's already hundreds of thousands of businesses using Google Apps every day, and millions of users on these products. And again, not referring to the consumer side, but really to the business side. Also seeing huge numbers of universities who are using the service to offer these email and collaboration technologies to their students. And we have thousands of universities who are already piloting and hundreds who have already rolled it out to their students, which in our view is a great way to sort of produce people who grow up, come into the professional world feeling very comfortable working in a Google environment. We are also seeing great traction with ISPs who really want to use these services and offer them in kind of a private labeled fashion to consumers. And really, this is for them a way to offer a better product at a much lower cost, and really, keep their users in the fold. And we're seeing some great traction there. We have millions of users through the ISP channel as well. And in kind of the Fortune 1000, if you will, large company world, we really came into this, I think, earlier this year thinking 2007, 2008 was going to be about small businesses adopting. They're the ones that can move quick, and there's a real long technology adoption curve in bigger businesses. But we're certainly surprised to see enormous interest from companies of almost every size and flavor in Google Apps and what it can do. And we have probably 20 to 30 pilots going on in companies whose names you'd all recognize that are at various stages of deployment or evaluation or rollout. So I think we're going to see over time companies of all flavors and sizes are adopting and are very interested and compelled by this. The adoption curve, I think, will always follow what you'd expect, which is for a new radical type of technology, smaller businesses tend to move first. But we're definitely seeing movement, excitement, and across companies of all sizes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks to all of you. Do we have time for Q&A, or should we open it up? Yeah. Are there questions we could answer for you?
I have a question for Nick. Omid started off talking about this balance between quality and revenue. And with that as the context, I think most people in this room look at Google and see a company where they can really pull the levers to basically get to whatever number they want. That's sort of the conventional wisdom around Google. So my question to you is, with how much precision can you really know what the changes you're going to mean for revenue through your experimentation? And also, how aware are you of what the street consensus numbers are and what people within the company expect in terms of revenue? Thanks. Sure. And you said to ask a hard question, so.
Thanks, Ben. So I think there's a couple of parts to the question. One is how well can we actually predict what's going to happen, and number two is to what extent do we use that insight combined with external estimates to control things. The answer to the first part is we have a huge amount of precision and insight into what the impact of changes will be. Through our experimentation, we will know exactly what's going to happen to click-through, what's going to happen to cost per click, what's going to happen to user happiness, what's going to happen to revenue. So from an analytical perspective, we have great insight into that, and really rely on that to the extent that we decide to make changes one way or another. We're completely insulated from what the external expectations are. We've made very conscious decisions not to adjust how we serve ads to meet external expectations. We've also made conscious decisions not to adjust ads to meet internal expectations either. We obviously do keep a very close eye on what our revenue looks like and what our numbers look like. There's a process, what we call it Revenue Force, which is a combination of a monthly process where we meet with our executives, as well as a weekly process where a smaller group of us meet to make sure that we understand what's happening with the business, where the various different metrics are trending. But we've stayed very, very far away from actually making tunings or adjusting these thresholds, or sort of, you might call them dials, to actually have that kind of an impact. We don't think that's the right decision for our users. We don't think that's the right decision for our business.
Yeah. Just to maybe add a little bit more to that, one of the things we decided very early on was this process where we really have a waterfall chart where we look at, what is our base plan for the quarter, what is the Salesforce quotas, what is foreign exchange effects, what are the product upside plans. That a lot of these plans we need to wait to see them launched. We need to observe their impact. And again, very sophisticated process of watching that number every week and determining where we're going to end up. And we also removed this critical point you raised, which is build the real Chinese wall, where the decisions to launch are really from a product and quality perspective, and really has visibility all the way to the execs and Eric making a call that has been done cleanly and not with any individual or any individual group kind of playing with the dials, because we've got to be very careful with that. The questions?
Hi, Bob Peck, Bear Stearns. Even just following up there a little bit more, directionally, what inning of the baseball game are we in for monetization domestically? CPC, et cetera? And then where does that compare versus internationally, even just directionally? And ultimately, the gadgets, when we think about the gadget ads, is that a way for you to monetize maybe other social networks without having to buy stakes in them, without having to buy the companies in general? Is it a way for the developers actually to get paid for the gadgets they're making on these other social platforms? Thanks.
Yes, Brian and Nick, maybe combination.
Maybe I'll turn it up to Brian for the gadgets question. I'll take the inning question. So that's another question I hear quite a bit. I try to stay away from predicting innings. You never know if you're going to go into extra innings, so it's kind of a risky thing to predict. What I would say, as I said earlier, I am obviously very, very bullish about the potential both domestically as well as internationally. I think from an inning perspective, we're probably in an earlier inning internationally than we are in the U.S., but that does vary. It's not really so much a U.S. versus international thing. A market like the U.K. is a very well developed market, probably more developed than the U.S. is. But as I said, I do see a lot of upside for additional monetization gains, whether it's coming from CPC. We look at ROI metrics, et cetera, and we do see that our advertisers are advertising profitably, so there's room for growth there. But also, certainly from a click-through rate perspective, as I said, the ads aren't as relevant as they could be. They can certainly be more relevant, which drives a lot of room for growth in click-through rate. Same thing on the sort of coverage or sort of ads per number of ads we show per query perspective. As I said, we're showing really a very low number of ads relative to where we were historically and relative to what we could display. So there's also headroom there. So that's how I would answer that.
And on the gadget question, probably the right way to look at it is there's gadgets that are purely about consumer functionality. There's gadget ads that the advertisers really have some sort of brand association like what you saw here. And then within social networks, there's ads that are on the social networks themselves. We play in all three spaces, and there's some morphing that could take place in each. So just taking the gadgets themselves, so we have the Google gadgets, and we're testing, looking at different ways that we can monetize those gadgets, but ultimately they need to be great for users and a good user experience. Facebook has their version of this, and we actually are monetizing their developers. And in our case, the developers look like websites. So instead of doing a rev share with a website, we're doing the rev share with the developer that's getting the adoption of those applications. So that's sort of the consumer space of gadgets. One last thing to mention is that some of the gadgets, like in our case, could be video gadgets that if the content has been cleared and we can show advertisements on them, they can somewhat morph into a advertising type of gadget as well, even though the user put them on their page just for the consumer video aspect of it. Gadget ads are things that these are more consumer pull we just talked about. Gadget ads are more advertiser push, so the advertisers would look for their segment that they're trying to reach and actually target those segments. They've got brand messages, interactivity, they're fun, engaging type of ads that people can go after. They're typically bought on a CPM basis today. They could be bought on a CPC or CPA basis, similar how we combine within the auction CPC ads, CPA ads, and CPM ads, and come up with the highest yielding ad based on predictions of click-through rates and conversions. So that's the bucket of CPM ads, and then there's just what we're doing on social networks with ads that could have interesting functionality, or they're just targeted and useful to users, and that's where the segmentation of the audience becomes a really critical signal for us.
Thank you.
Hi, Mark Mahaney with Citigroup. Two questions. Tim, that 1% of large CPGs spending with Google, if we think about what are the major obstacles there, if in 5 years they're spending 10% of their advertising online, half of that with Google, how do they get there? Can they just get there by purely organizationally embracing search, or do they have to be buying display, video advertising, and off-internet advertising from Google in order to have 5% of their spend with Google? And then, Nick, real quickly, that Hillary Clinton example you made, I actually thought that the ads on the right were relevant. The big difference was there weren't any video or stills in there or display ads. Is that what you were talking about in terms of the monetization opportunity? And would advertisers be willing to pay dramatically more for leads off of those kind of formats? Thanks.
I'll Tim start, and I think I got to probably do a disclaimer here that I think the 1% wasn't scientifically achieved. It was a figure of speech by Tim.
In this case, actually, it was a little scientific just because we were only running with one of their brands. So I think in that case, that did represent 1% of their I don't want to misline the numbers, but that was a real case. And two is there's probably three areas that really need to happen. One is organizationally, I think, and organizationally in three different areas. I think there's our organization, I think there's their organization, the clients, and then there's the agency organization. And I think you actually see all three of those areas basically doing a lot of investing on people and infrastructure to basically align these things correctly. So if you're that CPG company, the question is, if you're having tremendous success in one brand, why isn't that happening in all the other brands? A lot of it comes down to communication. A lot of it comes down to international issues of the communication, those things. So we're aligning that. Two is real clear metrics. So I think one of the things that we have been working on are metrics that actually meet their internal metrics, speaking their language. And I think a lot of the tools we're building actually are happening in that area. And then the third piece, which is, I think, important, is us organizing basically the inventory, whether it's search or brand or those type of things, to really clearly fit their segmentation need in terms of a consumer solution. So I'll give you a real-life example. And this is a case where we're probably not optimizing this, and there is a lot of headroom left in search, which is, at my house, I have 3 little kids. There's a lot of spilling chocolate milk on Oriental rugs, and my wife is generally online looking for how to get chocolate milk off of Oriental rugs. I think if you do that search, there's probably very few ads coming up in terms of a value for that ad, for a value for both the CPG customer as well as a value for my household is a pretty important search. And I think that is true across every single one of their segments as a whole. So there's room to grow just in search, which is a lot of headroom. There's room to grow in the brand stuff. And then the offline stuff, this customer happens to be testing some of the offline stuff. And I think there's a lot of room to grow there. So I think getting to 5% should be very achievable as long as we work really hard.
Yeah, Nick, you had a component to that question.
On the Hillary Clinton. So the question is, where is the opportunity on the Hillary Clinton query? What types of ads should we be showing? The concern I had about the ads on those queries was even sort of from a text-based ad perspective, these are not the ads that I sort of aspire to be showing. I think you're right, they were relevant, but they weren't the best, for example, landing page experience, or they weren't I would say they weren't the best ads we could potentially show. From a question of sort of from the format perspective, we're not spending a huge amount of time thinking about non-text formats on search. One of the things we are very careful of is the success of the company has come from having a very unobtrusive ad format within our search results, and we don't want to lose that. So certainly anything we would do that went beyond that would be something we do very carefully. With the user first and looking at what the user's interested in. I think it certainly is possible that, for example, a video or a graphical ad format may be more useful to the user on that query, but we would need to do a lot more research and studying to actually understand what that impact is. I think there's a larger opportunity, and what we're focusing on more immediately is how to improve the text ads on that type of a query to actually make them even more relevant and even more what the user is looking for.
Questions? Maybe one on this side. To the right, please. Yeah.
Another question for Nick. That is, when you do your when you do your testing of the new changes you're going to make, do you have a control group where you don't do any of the changes so that you can see what portion of the increase in monetization is from just an increase in liquidity of advertisers, having more advertisers, versus the change in the technology? And if so, over the last few years, what portion of the change in monetization is due to technology versus just liquidity of advertisers?
Yeah. So the question is, to what extent do we have a control over how are we doing these, how are we actually running these experiments, and what portion of the change comes from changes that we're making to our ads quality versus sort of natural growth of the business. On the first side of that, we certainly have a control group. We're running essentially we're running properly designed scientific experiments to understand what's going on, comparing versus the control group in real time. And the second part of the question, I don't want to get into the sort of specific numbers there. I think we're seeing contribution from both the we are seeing growth in monetization as a result of new advertisers and advertisers giving us additional budget, giving us new keywords, et cetera. And we also are seeing growth from the changes we're making in ads quality. Those actually work in a fairly, they sort of reinforce each other. Some of the changes we make from the ads quality side may just accelerate some of the changes that the advertiser may make themselves. For example, if we make a change that enhances the type of broadening that we do, perhaps that's doing little more than helping the advertiser figure out better keywords, which those advertisers may have done anyway. So there's sort of a nice relationship there where these two interact nicely.
I actually have a nickname for Nick and his team, and also the forecasting team that works with me. I really refer to them as the Greenspan of our operations. So there's a lot of economic analysis and testing that's really, really valuable. Back, all the way in the back.
Jordan Rohan, RBC Capital Markets. A couple of softball questions for Tim Armstrong. First, can you comment on the status of the implementation with MySpace and Fox Interactive? Specifically, it's been about 9 months or so, 9.5 months since the testing and implementation began. Is it making money for Google? Is there actually a positive impact on a quarterly basis there? Or the value of that search inventory, is it greater than the minimum guarantees paid to News Corp? And the second question is there any clarity that you can give on the potential strategic relationship or investment in Facebook? There are some reports that just hit the tape that Microsoft has edged its way into that at a very high valuation. Any commentary would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Sure. So quickly on the on the MySpace relationship, I think overall I don't think we're going to comment on the specifics of the monetization there, but I think both companies are actually working really well together to make sure that deal is successful. I think even just from the interactions, I think both product and sales and executives have on a constant basis there that I think we would describe it as successful, and they would too. And then I think on the Facebook things, I don't think we'll comment at this point. I would just say that I think we have tremendous respect for them as a company, and I think we have a tremendous amount of social networking happening across the web that Brian kind of described earlier. So I think that we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, let me add maybe a little bit more color to it. Is on when we do these partnerships, again, we take a look at the entire length of a partnership, and we do take risks in terms of the guarantees we're going to place on the monetization and count on our rate of improvements on the product side as well as traffic and improvements and working with a partner. So again, based on all those analysis, we're still confident that we're on the right trajectory. Now we've got to still do a lot of work on both sides to make the monetization improve, and the traffic on their side has to be delivered, and we've got to do a lot of experimentation on different placements of ads, and the relationship allows for that, and we're hard at work on that. And I think, sorry, Tim.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the process that's been described here between Nick and Brian, I think is the same process we actually bring to partners. When we sign those partnerships, we actually have the same amount of level of, I think, math going on and also sales activity. And then second of all, I think even before we do these deals, we actually apply those to the deals as well. So I think, as much as I think we take risks on things, I think we're also, internally very, very careful and methodical, about thinking about these partnerships at a broad scale.
And in terms of new partnerships, one last thing, maybe relating to Facebook, this applies to all the partnerships we look at now. We are pretty confident that we do have the best monetization globally at this point, and that when we work with these partners, the kind of the revenue sharing models that we built, we believe, again, in general, we can win on the basis of the economics analysis that we do. And again, in each case, it becomes a different opportunity where the partner then has to consider not only the economic factor, but other strategic benefits they may have to align with us or our competition. So in terms of access to that kind of inventory, though, and the social network inventory, there's plenty of it with Google's own properties as well as the network and the MySpace relationship. Let's see, one more question here. You guys can decide. There's a team of people here.
Thank you. Youssef Scully at Jefferies. Question for Tim. Going back to your CPG example before, do you feel that you need more consultative resources as you move or as you try to go for that 10% or 99% of the revenues? And particularly, I guess, as you address or you tackle the offline target or the offline opportunity? And secondly, on DoubleClick, how would that acquisition help you in that example, if at all? Thanks.
So I think quickly at a broad-based scale, I think the answer is, a few years ago, we actually took a fairly large risk as a company to, one, really hire very consultative people and set them up in groups. So if you came into our organization today, there's actually meetings with customers here on campus happening today where there's 8 or 10 Googlers and 10 to 30 people from these other companies. Omid was at one yesterday in general. So on a consultative basis, we are actually probably as far along or further along than anyone in the space is, in a very consultative sense. In terms of new skill sets within that consultative area, the marketing type, brand advertiser type thing, skill sets, we've actually added a fair amount of people who have those skill sets and backgrounds to the team. And in general, we have this thing called the Google Brand Accelerator internally, which is a group of people who both have Google backgrounds as well as marketing backgrounds. They're a centralized team, which is basically leveraging out across the globe to actually help our teams move beyond search into these other areas. And I think that is becoming a real success metric for us in general. And then in terms of that example with the CPG customer with DoubleClick, if you take a giant step back and look at how the CPG is organized, their agencies and all of the different things they do in their different divisions, you would see different pieces of technology, serving, creative, used in every individual division based on their agencies. And I think one thing that DoubleClick will allow us to do, the deal hasn't closed yet, but in essence, speed to market for us to play in some of the areas we haven't played in yet. So if you happen to be a division, let's say you're a detergent division of that consumer packaged goods company, you were using DoubleClick as a serving process, but also using creative tools and things that they had, that may preclude you just from a time allocation standpoint from using Google's products and services. I think eventually they would use them, but I think from a time to market, ability for that division to come onto our content network, to be on YouTube, those type of things, it's a very important piece of the puzzle for us. And just quickly, brand ads has kind of 3 things you have to be successful at. One is you need to have the right list of advertisers. We have that today. 2 is you have to have creative tools and serving tools which meet the needs there, and I think that's exactly one of the reasons we didn't try to acquire DoubleClick. And then the 3rd piece is measurement, and I think today we're expanding our measurements greatly. DoubleClick has been doing the same thing, so I think the culmination of Google and DoubleClick will actually bring a lot more information to the advertising space in general for these customers. I don't know if you...
Yeah, nothing to add.
Thank you. I think we want to keep you guys on schedule for the rest of the calendar today, but there's going to be more opportunities for questions later. Just again, wanted to thank you, the panel. As you can see, we have really great opportunities and really great minds that are working on them, and I look forward to spending the rest of the afternoon with you. George?
Great job, guys.